Hi everyone, welcome to Vision IS and welcome to class number 6 of internal security in the regular batch. And this also happens to be the last class for internal security that we'll be taking up. And in the last class, I had introduced you to the topic of border management. I told you that what is the difference between the term border management and border security. I told you that border security is a very narrow term in a sense that it is basically the protection of countries' boundaries from hostile elements, unwanted elements, where you're trying to protect the country's territory from any kind of untoward incidents. That could be drug trafficking, that could be human trafficking, that could be various other organized crimes, as well as the serious crimes such as the terrorism, such as Naxalism, such as the influence of insurgency, cross-border militancy, etc., and all of those things. So I discussed with you that is what is the meaning of the term border security. Now, when we look at the term border management is a much more broader term as compared to border security. Border management as a term refers to the management of the borders in such a manner that you are not only able to ensure the security of the border areas, but also the idea is to ensure the economic development of the areas in a comprehensive manner. So when we talk about border security, even though it may be the various security agencies and the security forces on the border that may be responsible for border security, but when we talk about border management, all the other administrative agencies also come into play when we refer to border management. So that is the difference that I understood, that we have been able to understand as far as border management in India is concerned. I'll just show you the definition of border management, and then we will go on to discuss about the various problems of border management and challenges related to border management in India. Okay, so that is what is going to be the discussion point for today, and then once we are done with that, we'll move on to the other topics. So let's begin. Let's not waste much of our time, and we'll do this now. Now, this is what is the definition of border management, which we need to keep in mind. Border management, in the widest term, as a term in its widest sense, implies coordination and concerted action by the political leadership and the administrative, diplomatic, security, intelligence, legal, regulatory, and the economic agencies of the country to secure the frontiers and subserve the best interest of the country. As far as the definition of border management by the Ministry of Home Affairs is concerned, they say that border management is securing countries' borders against interest hostile to the country and putting in place systems that are able to prohibit such elements while facilitating legitimate trade and commerce across the borders of the country. So that is what we need to understand by the meaning of the term border management in India. Now let us talk about what are the various challenges that are associated with the border management as far as India is concerned, and why border management is such a problematic issue, or why it is such a problematic task in case of India. So let's talk about the various challenges of border management in India. Why is border management such a task, and what are the challenges that we are facing as far as India's border management is concerned? So again, here what you can do is that you can club these different aspects, different dimensions of border management, and try to make it a more structured approach when we talk about what are the challenges associated with border management. So the first challenge that we can talk about when border management in India is concerned is the geographical challenges. The geographical challenges. Okay. Now, when we talk about geographical factors that make it difficult to manage the borders in India, you have to understand that the biggest problem of border management in India stems from the fact that we do not have natural borders with our neighboring countries. If you look at our borders, when you look at our borders with Pakistan, it's not a natural border. What do I mean by a natural border? Look at the kind of border that we have with China. There are Himalayas there which are in between. A giant mountain range is standing between India and China, which is a natural border between India and China. Similarly, if I were to say that what is the border between India and Africa, right? We have the entire Indian Ocean which is making the natural boundary and the natural border between India and Africa. But when it comes to the borders that India has with its neighboring countries, let's say for example Pakistan, Bangladesh, Nepal, Bhutan, Myanmar, most of these borders are man-made borders. These are artificial borders. They have been artificially drawn by the human beings. There is nothing natural about these borders. As a result of it, it is very difficult to guard these borders. When you look at India-Bangladesh border, for example, there are thousands of small rivers that are cutting across the Indo-Bangladesh border. Small rivulets, thousands of rivers are cutting crisscross across the Indian-Bangladesh border. As a result of it, it becomes very difficult to erect fences on the border. Fencing on the border is a major challenge. Then, if you look at the infiltration and the illegal immigration also, that also becomes a major challenge, because movement of people from India to Bangladesh and from Bangladesh to India is very easy, simply because there are so many geographical features which one has to encounter as a part of border management and border security, that it is almost impossible to completely fence the border. So first aspect that we can talk about is the fact that India has artificial borders or man-made borders with most of its neighboring countries. And because we have artificial or man-made borders with our neighboring countries, to guard these borders becomes a major challenge. Okay, so having artificial borders with the neighboring countries makes it very difficult to erect fences, makes it very difficult to guard these borders. So you can write down that the guarding of the borders becomes a challenge. Guarding is a challenge. It becomes a major difficulty when it comes to managing the borders. Like the other thing that you can also talk about is the kind of geography that exists in the frontier areas of India, especially when you look at the border areas in Jammu and Kashmir, when you look at the border areas in Uttarakhand, when you look at border areas in Himachal, when you look at border areas in Northeast India. These areas are very difficult terrain and topography, right? So you can mention about the difficult terrain and topography in these areas, which makes it naturally difficult to develop physical infrastructure in these areas. Okay, so that is also something that can be mentioned by you, that the difficult terrain and topography in the border areas also makes it very difficult to guard the border areas in a proper manner, because developing any kind of physical infrastructure becomes a major challenge, right? So that eventually what it leads to is the poor infrastructure in the border areas. If I were to talk about the kind of challenges that we face on the border with China, for example, the Indo-Chinese border, the kind of asymmetry that exists in infrastructure is unimaginable. China is drawing almost 8-lane highways all the way up from the interiors of the country to the border areas. And when we talk about India, we have still not been able to make proper roads in the border areas of the country. There have been reports which have highlighted that at several places in Arunachal Pradesh, Indian security forces have to trek for a few days to reach the border posts, because there is no other way for them to reach the border posts except on foot through trekking. So you can imagine, in case there is a conflict that breaks out between India and China, China would be able to mobilize its forces in a very speedy manner, in a very quick manner. And India, on the other hand, our forces would still be trekking towards the border post. So That is also another aspect that we can talk about. Difficult terrain and topography in the border areas makes it very difficult to develop the infrastructure. As a result, we have poor infrastructure in the border areas and border management becomes a major challenge. You can also talk about that how this difficult terrain and topography also leads to the economic backwardness of these areas. That's also one of the major causes for the economic backwardness of these areas, which can be highlighted here when we talk about the various challenges associated with the border management in India. Okay, so that's the other aspect that we need to talk about, that is difficult terrain and topography in the border areas of the country. Now, once we have discussed about the difficult terrain and topography, once we have discussed about the artificial borders on the border areas, then what are the other challenges that exist as far as the border areas of India are concerned, or what are the major challenges that we face with respect to the borders? Now, the other aspect is the diplomatic aspect of the border management. Now, India still continues to have unsettled boundary with most of its neighbors. So that is what you can mention. We have unsettled or disputed boundaries. We have boundary disputes with most of our neighboring countries, and because of these disputed boundaries and unsettled boundaries, managing the border areas also becomes a major challenge. Because see, say for example, if the borders are not settled, you would never want to erect the kind of infrastructure, plus the international laws also do not allow that, and if it's a disputed area, then the other country would always object to whatever infrastructure that would be raised by you in the border areas. So disputed boundaries or unsettled boundary disputes that we have with the neighboring countries of the country is also something that can be highlighted by you when we talk about the various challenges associated with the issue of the border management. Okay, so that is also something that we can talk about when we talk about the challenges associated with border management in India. Okay, so these are the two major challenges that we need to first highlight. First one is the geographical challenges that exist. Then we have unsettled boundaries with most of our neighbors. That is also something that can be highlighted. Then the third issue that you can highlight is we have multiplicity of forces in the border areas. Okay, multiplicity of forces in the border areas. Now, what am I trying to highlight here? I told you that we have multiple border guarding forces. We have the Assam Rifles, we have Shasastra Seema Bal, we have ITBP, we have BSF, we have Indian Army, right? So because there are multiple forces that are placed on a single border with the same country, it becomes a task to have a standard approach to border management. Now, what you can also mention here especially is that the standard operating procedures of each of these forces is very different from the other. As a result of it, there are interoperability issues with the border management. The other thing that you can also talk about is that the multiplicity of forces also makes coordination between the various forces a major task in the border areas. Okay, so that is also something that can be highlighted by you when we talk about the multiplicity of forces leading to various challenges associated with border management. Now, other than these issues, what are the other highlights that can be mentioned by you? You can also mention about that how we have open borders with some of our neighboring countries. India has open or porous borders with some of its neighboring countries. We have the Treaty of Peace and Friendship that we have signed with Bhutan and with Nepal, as a result of which what tends to happen is that we have free movement of the people from across the border, from India to Nepal and India to Bhutan, and from Nepal to India and from Bhutan to India. So that also makes it a major challenge because of these open borders. There is no visa regime which is there. right? There are no strict security checks that are there in place, as a result of which border management becomes very challenging, especially because people make to and fro movement from one area to another, and a lot of these at times are criminals also. Okay, so the open and the porous borders that India has with its neighboring countries is also something that can be, just a second, is also something that can be highlighted by you when we talk about challenges associated with border management in India. Okay, so sorry, just a second. So that's also, yes, that's also something that can be highlighted by you when we talk about the challenges associated with border management in India, right? Then what you also need to mention is that, see, in India often the border guarding forces are diverted towards the internal security matter. So border guarding forces often are diverted towards the law and order problems in the hinterland of the country, as a result of which what happens is that there is shortage of workforce, there is shortage of staff, there is shortage of manpower in the border area. So that is also something that can be highlighted by you, that border guarding forces are often deployed for taking care of the law and order problems in the hinterland of the country, therefore creating problems with respect to border management. So you can also mention repeated withdrawal of the forces from the border guarding duties for internal security issues is also something that can be highlighted there. Right, so that's something which can be highlighted when we talk about problems of border management. And then of course you can also talk about that there is a lack of concern, repeated lack of concern towards the problems of the local population, as a result of which they tend to be swayed away by the extremists or by hostile elements, because there are no employment opportunities, economic development is not there, economic backwardness is there. So large number of times people, those who are resident in the border areas of India, do tend to get enamored, do tend to get swayed with the opportunities that are offered to them in terms of earning money or in terms of being able to get some kind of monetary benefits for themselves by the extremists that are operational in these areas. So that is also something that can be highlighted by you when we talk about the problems associated with the border management and the problems associated with the border, the challenges associated with border management in India, right? So that's also something which we can talk about. और फिर कई बार कई लोग ये पूछते हैं कि sir, what are the reasons because of which the infrastructure is so poor in the border area? See, first and foremost, you need to understand that the shortage of the workforce with the various organizations that are supposed to be responsible for developing the border infrastructure in the border area. Say for example the Border Roads Organization, which is definitely overburdened with the task of developing the border roads. Then you also need to talk about that we have not allocated enough funds also to the development of the infrastructure in the border areas. Okay, so that is also something that can be highlighted by you. You can also talk about the poor implementation. Large number of projects have been have witnessed time and the cost overruns, so that is also something that can be mentioned. Then you can also talk about the lack of monitoring mechanisms with respect to whatever implementation projects are being implemented or whatever infrastructural projects are being implemented in the border areas of the country, right? So these are some of the challenges as far as the border management of India are concerned, starting from geographical challenges to diplomatic challenges, having multiplicity of forces, operational challenges में आ जाएगा ये. This you can talk about in terms of the open and the porous borders that we have with our neighboring countries. You can also talk about the border guarding forces. इसके अलावा आप ये भी बोल सकते हो that the India, you know, is present in the vicinity of some of the most disturbed regions of the world. We are in the vicinity of some of the most disturbed regions of the world. You look at Afghanistan, right? The kind of challenge that Afghanistan as a nation state poses to India is enormous, especially now after Taliban has taken over Afghanistan, and how the Taliban is relying on narco terrorism and narco trafficking for its survival, is something which is of a cause of worry for India, because it can create havoc in the Indian society. It can first and foremost lead to greater consumption of drugs and the narco substances in the Indian society. Second is that India can also become a transit route, which already India is to a large extent, for the narco terrorism and for narco trafficking. Then on top of that, of course, you don't want your neighborhood to be occupied by the fundamentalist forces, because it can definitely have repercussions on your internal security as well, on your internal security measures as well. Then on top of that, what you also need to understand is that, see, one is आपने अफगानिस्तान का mention कर दिया. अगर आप म्यांमार भी देखें, so even with respect to Myanmar, it's not a democracy. There is an army rule that has been placed in Myanmar, very unstable kind of a country. So again, there is always a danger of Myanmar also being used by the extremists, by the insurgents. They may be getting the support of the government in Myanmar as well. So that is also something that can be highlighted. Plus, you can also, mention about that how India is in the vicinity of the Golden Triangle and the Golden Crescent. Now, if you people would know, on India's west, we have something called as the Golden Crescent. Now, the Golden Crescent is one of those regions of the world which is the major drug producing region of the world, that includes the countries of Iraq, Afghanistan and Pakistan. And when we talk about Golden Triangle, this is also one major drug producing region of the world where opium, poppy production, etc. takes place in large quantity, and this is on the eastern border of India, right? So what you can mention here on the Golden Triangle aspect is that, again, the Laos and Myanmar and Thailand, these are the countries that are considered to be a part of the Golden Triangle. So India is in the vicinity of Golden Triangle and in the vicinity of the Golden Crescent, as a result of which we are always at risk from various hostile elements in the neighboring part of the country. Of course, Myanmar, there is no democratic regime that is there in place, and the fact that there is unstable, regime which is there in place, corrupt regime which is there in place, corrupt military regime, junta is in place, as a result of which there is always a chance that insurgents may shake hands or may tie up with these neighboring countries, especially considering the kind of unstable environment that is around India. So all of these issues make border management a major challenge as far as India is concerned. Now, let us try to understand what are some of the these are some of the problems that have been also mentioned here: repeated withdrawal, sharing and coordination of intelligence, concerns of local people are not given enough weightage, improper physical infrastructure in the border areas of the country. These are some of the pointers that can be mentioned. Now, what are the effects of this poor border management? How is poor border management linked to India's internal security is the next thing that we need to understand. So what are the linkages of this poor border management with India's internal security issues? So linkages between poor border management and various internal security threats. Now see, you will find that all the internal security threats of India are in some way or the other linked with the issue of poor border management. Okay, so that is something that we need to keep in mind, that linkages between poor border management and various internal security threats. Now, what are the various things that we need to understand here? What we need to be highlighting here is that, see, when we talk about militancy in Kashmir, isn't it related to poor border management across the LOC and the Indo-Pakistan border? Similarly, if we talk about the problem of the insurgency in Northeast, isn't also that very closely related to the problem of poor border management? You can, for example, talk about that how various insurgent groups in Northeast make movement across the border right, and have found safe havens for themselves in the other countries. So many groups that are operational in Northeast India, NSC and etc. have found their safe havens in countries such as Myanmar, Bangladesh, Bhutan, etc. in the past. You can also talk about that one of the major causes for the rise of insurgency in India, in Northeast, has been illegal immigration into Northeast. So that is how, again, the problem of border management is so intricately linked to the problem of internal security or various internal security threats that are faced in India, right? So whether it is insurgency in Northeast, whether it is militancy in Kashmir, even if you link it to the issue of Naxalism. In 2009, as per a report of the Ministry of Home Affairs, more than 40 Maoists, I told you this earlier as well, more than 40 Maoists in India, it was highlighted in the report of Ministry of Home Affairs, they received their training in Nepal. So three major internal security issues of India are definitely related to poor border management. And then on top of that, you also need to add some of the other things as well. You know, narco trafficking, poor border management, drug trade that is taking place in India is also very closely related to the poor border management. You can also talk about the problem of organized crime, where several organized criminals find refuge in the neighboring countries because of the easy movement from one country to another. So see, these are some of the things that we need to understand, because in 2013, UPSC asked a question in the mains examination that how is the problem of the various internal security issues in India closely related to the challenges of border management or closely related to border security and border management in India. So these are some of the things that can be highlighted by you of what are the effects, what are the problems that poor border management and these challenges in border management can pose to India's internal security. Okay, so that's something that can be highlighted by you, and that is what has been mentioned here as well. Infiltration of armed militants, etc. and so on and so forth. All these things I have mentioned here, which you can read it on your own. I hope that you are able to follow and understand me till here about what are the various issues that pertain to border management when it comes to India. What are the challenges and what are the effects of this poor border management on India's internal security, right? Now let's look at something else also that I wanted to show to you, and that is if we look at the borders of India country wise as well. What is this new item available? Huh? Okay, anyway, so yes, let's have a look at this ones. Lack of critical infrastructure, contested international borders, porosity of borders, ethnic conflicts and separatist movement taking place in the border areas, overpopulation in the border areas, poor infrastructure in the border areas. These are some of the things that we need to keep in mind when we talk about issues related to border management in India. They have been repeated here simply so you can look at them. Then what are the various limitations in developing the border infrastructure in the border areas? This is something that I just highlighted to you a while back, and you can refer these pointers. First and foremost, you can mention about the poor implementation. That is in 2017, CAG pointed out in its report that out of the 73 roads that had been allotted in the border areas, only 22 were completed by March 2016. Similarly was the case with the 14 strategic railway lines as well. So the implementation of the various infrastructural projects in the border areas has been lagging behind. There has been lack of efficiency in the implementation of these projects. Then lack of monitoring also as far as the various infrastructural projects are concerned in the border areas, where it results in defective construction of roads, including faulty design, poor riding conditions, inadequate drainage facilities, etc., that considerably affects the longevity and the life of these roads that have been developed in the border areas of the country. Then multiple authorities managing the borders is also something that we need to keep in mind, which makes it very difficult to develop the infrastructure in the border areas. Lack of unity command, that we do not have a single leadership when it comes to the governance and the management of the border areas in India. Staff deficiency and lack of modern equipments. Organizations such as Border Roads Organization have been facing severe shortage of staff when it comes to developing the border infrastructure. Plus, they have also been facing problems when it comes to the issue that they are too much dependent on the local contractors and they do not really have access to the kind of technology which they should be having as a part of border management. And then of course, lack of adequate allocation of funds for infrastructure, as has even been pointed out by the army as well. So these are some of the reasons because of which the development of the infrastructure in the border areas remains to be a challenge. Now, so if we talk about the various challenges that exist across the Indian border with neighboring countries, these are some which are supposed to be mentioned. And what we need to keep in mind here is that each and every border that we share with the neighboring country is very different in its character, is very different in its nature. Okay, so that is what we will be discussing next now when we talk about the issues that are associated with border management, and we will be looking at the issue of border management in a 1 second. Yes, in a country-wise manner. So first and foremost, what are the challenges that exist across the Indo-Chinese borders? Number of them. First and foremost, we have a number of ongoing disputes with the Chinese in the border areas, both on the eastern as well as the western sector. Eastern sector is the one which is referred to in Arunachal Pradesh, and the western sector is within Jammu and Kashmir, right? So in both the areas, we have ongoing problems with the Chinese with respect to borders. Chinese believe that Arunachal Pradesh is a part of Tibet and therefore is a part of China. Chinese also lay claim over large parts of the eastern part of Jammu and Kashmir as well, including some parts of Ladakh as well. There is an already ongoing tussle between Indian and the Chinese forces when it comes to Pangong Tso Lake, as you would know, and we have been reading about that in the newspapers time and again. Similarly, in Arunachal Pradesh as well, there are a number of issues that are ongoing between India and China. So that is one issue when it comes to the Indo-Chinese border. So what has been mentioned here is border dispute at Aksai Chin, Arunachal Pradesh, Doklam, etc., where there is sporadic aggression that is shown by the Chinese from time to time. Then large-scale smuggling of the Chinese electronic and other consumer goods takes place through these border points. That is also a major internal security threat to India, especially because of the fact that we are losing out on such great amount of revenue. Then the inadequate infrastructure due to difficult terrain, and then what you need to understand here is that there is asymmetry of infrastructure in the border areas with China, because China has a completely different border infrastructure as compared to India, which makes the task of border management very challenging when it comes to China. Then similarly, multiple forces across the Indian border with China. For example, we have ITBP also in some areas Assam Rifles is there, in some areas Special Frontier Force is there, as opposed to the single PLA commander on the Chinese side. So whereas Chinese are dealing as one with us, we as a nation are having multiple forces on the borders with the Chinese. And then of course, water sharing issue which India has, as China is building dams on its side and reducing and China is building dams on its side and reducing the water flows on our side. So these are the challenges which exist along the Indo-Chinese border, and these are some of the recent initiatives that have been taken by the government with respect to the Indo-Chinese border that have been mentioned. So you please read them on your own. Right now, the other thing that we also need to keep in mind is when we talk about the challenges on the Indo-Pakistan border. Now, what are the challenges on the Indo-Pakistan border? See, challenges on Indo-Pakistan border are also pretty much, similar to the Indo-Chinese border challenges, where again we have disputed areas with Pakistan in the Indo-Pakistan border. So when we talk about border dispute that still exists in Sar Creek and Kashmir, both the countries have not been able to align themselves, have not been able to agree upon the various border disputes that the various claims that are made by one or the other nation with respect to what territory they control and what territory the other country controls. What we also need to keep in mind is that the river water sharing issue that exists at the Indus River. Okay, so that is also something that can be highlighted by you. Then infiltration and cross-border terrorism that Pakistan has been promoting as a part of its strategy to initiate a proxy war against India, to bleed India by 1,000 cuts. Right, diverse terrain that includes snow-capped mountains at certain places, deserts at certain places, marshes at certain places, as a result of which managing this Indo-Pakistan border also becomes a major challenge. And then time and cost overruns in the various infrastructural projects. We have been talking about building the smart fences and electrical fences on the India-Pakistan border and the LOC, but this project has been ongoing for many years now and we have still not been able to reach anywhere close to completion. And then of course other issues such as drug smuggling, fake currency, arms trafficking, etc. is something that we need to keep in mind when we talk about the issues existing across Indo-Pakistan border. What are the steps that have been taken in the recent times? One of the steps that we have taken in the recent times to improve the conditions on the Indo-Pakistan border is to essentially deploy technology for the surveillance, analysis of data, as well as threat perception and prediction on the border areas with Pakistan. So that is something that has been also highlighted here. You please read it on your own once, right? Then even on Indo-Nepal border, there are a number of various challenges that exist that have also been mentioned here. Let's have a look at them once. On Indo-Nepal border, there is increasing extremism and anti-India activities that are taking place in Nepal, and which is causing jitters in New Delhi. Simply because of the reason, because we have seen in the past how Nepal was launched as was used as a launch pad for a terrorist by Pakistan and for militancy that was initiated in the 1980s in Jammu and Kashmir. And even in Punjab, a number of these militants and terrorists used to receive their training in Nepal or used to make their way into India through Indo-Nepal border. So that's another challenge. Then fear of spread of the Maoist insurgency in the border areas is also something which is very real. Then easy escape and the illegal activities that are occurring in the Indo-Nepal border is also something which is of a major concern. Similarly, there are challenges with respect to Indo-Bhutan, Indo-Myanmar border, etc. also that have been mentioned. Let's have a quick look at them as well. So when we talk about the challenges that exist when it comes to the Indo-Bhutan border are also something which are very interesting. By the way, I will be dealing again with the issue of the challenges that each of these neighboring countries poses to India's internal security as an external state actor as well. Now, when we talk about Indo-Bhutan border, you can mention about the insurgency, whereas many groups such as Bodo, Ulfa, etc. sneak into Bhutan for sanctuary despite the Indian army driving them out. Smuggling of the goods is something which is very prevalent across Indo-Bhutan border, right? Then you can also talk about the Indo-Myanmar border. Now see, the interesting thing is that on Indo-Myanmar border, there is something called as the free movement regime. A number of tribal groups, especially the Naga groups, that reside on the Indian side of the border and on the Burmese side of the border, both of them have very strong cultural and the ties, cultural ties as well as family ties with each other. As a result of it, it was decided by both the countries that let us allow people belonging to certain tribes in Myanmar and in India to move from one country to another without having any visa. This movement, of course, will not be in an unregulated manner, but rather this movement can only be up till a certain extent within the territory of the other country, and would only be for a certain time period also. For example, from Myanmar side, people can move to India up till 14 kilometers and they can stay in India for up to 72 hours without any visa requirements. Now, this is free movement regime. The idea was to essentially ensure that the kind of cultural ties and the family ties that exist between the various tribal groups that exist across the border should not be affected simply because some artificial borders have been drawn by the human beings. But unfortunately, this free movement regime that we have with the free movement regime or the free movement agreement that we have with India, with Myanmar and on the India-Myanmar border is a major challenge. The reason for that is this free movement regime is also misused a lot of times by the insurgents and by the extremists to move across the border. Secondly, they also use this or misuse or abuse this movement regime in order to be involved in various illegal and criminal activities such as drug trafficking, trafficking in arms, ammunition, etc. as well. So that is another major problem that exists when we talk about the Indo-Myanmar border. And see, on Indo-Myanmar border, the biggest challenge is drug trafficking, especially because in Myanmar, there is a large amount of drug production that takes place. In fact, in recent years, there have been some officers of Indian Army also, those who were posted in Nagaland area, have been indicted for being involved in drug trafficking, where they were importing some of these basic drugs from Myanmar and then they were using it for manufacturing some advanced drugs in India, such as your cocaine, etc. and all of those things as well. Right? So that is what we need to talk about when we talk about various challenges that exist on the Indo-Myanmar border. Indo-Bangladesh border, again, the problems and the challenges are plenty, especially because there is a lot of illegal smuggling that is taking place on the Indo-Bangladesh border. Cattle smuggling is taking place from India to Bangladesh. Then on top of that, illegal immigration into India because of the porosity of Indo-Bangladesh border is also a major challenge. It is estimated, as per 2002 records of the government, and this is 20 years back, imagine. 20 years back it was highlighted that there are almost 12 million illegal immigrants from Bangladesh, those who are residing in India. Now that is 1.2 crores 20 years back, so you can very well imagine what the numbers must be looking at this point of time. Now this is a significant internal security threat to India. One, simply because of the reason that it has potential to snowball into a communal conflict in India. Second issue is that ultimately these people, we don't know whether they owe their allegiance to Bangladesh or whether to India. They are residing in India, but probably they owe their allegiance to Bangladesh, and at some point of time or maybe in future, there is a possibility that they may be misused by the hostile elements with respect to India to cause damage to India's internal security concerns as well. So that is also something that we need to keep in mind when we talk about the various challenges that exist as far as the Indo-Bangladesh border are concerned, right? So these are specific challenges that I have mentioned here, which you can read on your own with respect to each of the neighboring countries that we have when it comes to border management. Now the question that arises is that can technology play a crucial role? Because time and again, Indian government has been highlighting that technology can play a very crucial role in solving the problems of poor border management, especially because technology would be able to provide you greater reach, greater accessibility. Technology is also something which comes with least amount of human cost, in a sense that the danger to human life is least in terms of deployment of technology, and then the surveillance with the help of technology is definitely much more foolproof as compared to human surveillance that would be put in these border areas of the country. But the question that arises is that what is the role that technology can play in taking care of the various challenges associated with border management in India. So that is what we will be discussing next, that what is the role that can be played by technology. So in mains examination, there is a possibility that UPSC may ask you, what is the role that can be played by technology in managing the various challenges that exist with respect to border management in India. So first and foremost, what you can mention here is about the upgrading of the existing system. So it says that technology can be integrated with the existing system to facilitate better detection and interception by the man behind the machine. At present, border guarding is almost fully dependent on human surveillance. This makes border management a time-consuming and complex task. So you can say that it will help in bringing in more efficiency, as well as it will help in bringing in more effectivity in how the various borders of India are supposed to be managed. So that is the first pointer that can be mentioned by you here. Second is that technology can also play a very crucial role in checking infiltration on the Indian borders, right? Especially with the erection of the smart fences, it can play a very crucial role. It can help to detect infiltration via land, underwater, air and tunnels by deploying closed circuit television cameras, which is called as CCTV cameras, basically thermal imagers and night vision devices as well. Third thing is that technology will not only help in guarding your borders in a better manner, but here we are talking about the topic of border management, the issue of border management. So even border management can be resolved in a better manner, or the development of the economic opportunities in the border areas can also be done properly with the help of technology. So it says that it can help in facilitating cross-border trade as well. So newer forms of technology such as artificial intelligence, blockchain technology, data analysis, etc. can make it significantly easier to process the transactions and to promote trade with the neighboring countries. See, you have to always understand that if you have trade ongoing in a proper manner with your neighboring countries, chances of conflict with that country always reduce significantly. If we can improve our trade with the neighboring countries, that is one. Second is that when we facilitate trade through the border areas with the neighboring countries, then that would also lead to development of economic opportunities in the border areas as well. It could lead to development of the markets in and possibly various handicraft products, etc. that are produced in these border areas would be able to find a market for themselves in the neighboring countries. One specific example could be that how developing our borders with Myanmar can open up the entire Southeast Asian market for Indian products. That is the kind of advantage that can happen as a result of deployment of technology in the border areas. Of course, the other thing that you need to talk about is that the casualties that will occur in the border areas would decline significantly. Currently, our forces are deployed in very difficult conditions in the border areas. I hope you will agree with that, right? The kind of temperature, the kind of difficult circumstances in which they have to serve can also be overcome if we deploy technology properly in the border areas of the country. So that is also something that can be highlighted by you. Then improved intelligence inputs and surveillance, right, through remote sensing satellite, the radar satellites with synthetic aperture radar sensors that will be capable of providing day and night all terrain, all weather inputs. You cannot expect your security forces to be able to guard your borders in 100% effective manner through sun, through snow, through rain, through all the kind of climatic conditions, weather conditions, but you can definitely expect technology to give you output and to perform for you even in the most strenuous of the conditions as well, right? Then the Madhukar Gupta committee report. So there was a Madhukar Gupta committee that was formed by the government of India to recommend certain recommendations were to be provided with respect to deployment of technology. It had also recommended the union government to strengthen the border protection and address vulnerabilities in fencing along the Indo-Pakistan border. And this is how we came up with the idea of what is called as comprehensive integrated border management system, which I'm just going to discuss in a bit, right? So these are some of the things that we need to keep in mind when we talk about what are the various ways in which technology can play the role of a game changer when it comes to border management in India. Deployment of drone devices, deployment of state-of-art infrastructure that is coming up in the recent times, all of this can play a very crucial role in the border management of the country, right? So those are some of the things that can be mentioned by you when we talk about border management. Now, what exactly is this entire animal called as comprehensive integrated border management system? So comprehensive integrated border management system is an state of art technology that would be deployed on the border areas of India to make border management and border security more effective in nature. The most important objective of CIBMS is to prevent illegal activities in the border areas of India, as well as to prevent illegal immigration and infiltration that happens quite frequently into India, posing a great threat to India's internal security. Right? So CIBMS is basically, what will be happening in CIBMS is that there will be surveillance devices that would be deployed on the border areas. So already we have started to deploy the comprehensive integrated border management system in borders with Bangladesh and on borders with Pakistan. So surveillance devices would be put on the border areas. These surveillance devices would send data to an analysis center, where analysis of this information and data that is coming from the surveillance devices in the border areas would be done, and on the basis of the analysis that is done, this information would be sent to the command center, which will be centrally located, and then this command center would, in further on the basis of this information, issue directions to the security forces that are deployed in the border areas. Plus, the controlling of the surveillance devices can also be done by the command center, and some other aggressive tools also that would be placed on the border areas would also be controlled by the command center, therefore completing the entire circle of the comprehensive security that we want to deploy on the border areas of India, right? So that is the kind of silver lining that we can see when it comes with the deployment of technology in the border areas of the country. But see, you have to also understand that it's not that everything is hunky-dory with deployment of technology. Yes, technology as a concept can be great, but there are certain problems also associated with technology. So let us also discuss what are the challenges associated with deployment of technology in the border areas. Why it is not such an easy task to use the technology for the topic of border management is something that we are going to understand now. So challenges associated with deployment of technology in the border areas is the next topics that we will be discussing, right? So before I move further, any questions that you people may have related to whatever we have discussed till here? यहाँ तक जो भी discuss किया है, कोई सवाल है आप? Any questions that you have? Challenges associated with the deployment of the technology से पहले, any other questions that you have with respect to whatever topics that we have discussed till now? Yes. Any questions associated with whatever we have discussed till now related to the topic of border management? Okay, so let's proceed further. Now, what are the challenges associated with deployment of technology? See, first and foremost, you need to understand the biggest hurdle in deployment of technology is that technology is cost intensive. Deployment of technology in the border areas is going to come at a cost. It is going to be a cost intensive solution. It is cost intensive and it requires a lot of capital, right? So the amount of resources that would be required for deployment of technology in the border areas of country is huge. And when you look at India's border with our neighboring countries, for example, Bangladesh, our border with Bangladesh is almost 5,000 kilometers, right? Then look at our border with Pakistan, look at our border with China. If we are going to deploy technology on every nook and corner of India's borders with the neighboring countries, it is going to be a very expensive affair, right? So that is the first thing that we need to highlight here. Second issue that we also need to highlight here when we talk about the deployment of technology in the border areas or challenges associated with deployment of technology in the border areas is that you require manpower. You require trained manpower to deal with the deployment of technology. You see, technology is not going to operate on its own. You need some manpower which is technically trained. Right now, as far as the border guarding forces are concerned, we are facing a severe shortage of the workforce. Now, having said that, how do you expect that the trained, like shortage of workforce है और ऊपर से आपको इस मैन पावर को टेक्नोलॉजी को हैंडल करने के लिए भी तो ट्रेन करना पड़ेगा. So that is the second issue which is associated with technology. See, the third issue that is associated with the deployment of technology in the border areas is the poor physical infrastructure in the border areas. Ultimately, any of this technology would also be dependent upon some kind of physical infrastructure for its functioning, right? So poor physical infrastructure in the border areas is also something that will largely limit the implementation of various measures that are supposed to be taken on the front of technology with respect to border management, right? So that is also something that can be mentioned by you. And then the other thing that you also need to mention is that we also need to answer the questions about compatibility of technology with the conditions in the border areas. Compatibility of technology with the conditions that exist in the border areas is also something that we need to keep in mind. Now, what am I trying to say here? देखिए, इस बात को समझने की कोशिश कीजिएगा. जो भी हम ये सारी टेक्नोलॉजी की बात कर रहे हैं, ये वेस्टर्न कंट्रीज ने अडॉप्ट की हुई है. कहाँ पे अडॉप्ट की हुई है? जहाँ पे प्लेन एरियाज के अंदर बहुत ज़्यादा ऐसे को डिस्प्यूट्स नहीं है नेबरिंग कंट्रीज के साथ. Conditions are very different. Now, would we be able to deploy this technology in context of Indian border issues is something which is still unanswered to a large extent. We have started to deploy technology in the border areas, but how effective would that be? Is that what we want in the longer run? Would we be actually able to achieve the objectives in the longer run is something that still remains to be unanswered when we talk about challenges associated with deployment of technology in the border areas, right? So this is what we need to keep in mind. But of course, you should definitely, whenever you get a question, first and foremost related to the topic of border management, you should mention about role of technology is one. Secondly, what you should also do is, what you also need to keep in mind when we talk about the role of technology is that how technology can play a significant game changer when it comes to border management in the country, right? So this is what we need to discuss when we talk about the topic of border management in India and what are the various challenges that exist with respect to border management in India, right? Yes, any questions that you people have related to the topic of border management? Yes, any questions? The next topic that I'm going to discuss with you is the role of external state actors in creating challenges to India's internal security. Okay, so role of external state actors in creating challenges to India's internal security. We will try to look at state by state, that is country by country, external state actor by external state actor, and we'll try to understand what are the challenges that they create to India's internal security. First and foremost, let's start with Bangladesh. How Bangladesh as a nation poses challenges to India's internal security. As an external state actor, what are the challenges that Bangladesh poses to India's internal security? First and foremost, you can talk about illegal immigration from Bangladesh. Which has been a major cause of worry for the internal security agencies in India, especially because of the repercussions it has on the labor market in India. It has repercussions with respect to creating communal tensions in India, and also that the fact that insurgency in Northeast to a large extent is rooted in the illegal immigration from Bangladesh, right? So that is the first challenge. Second, what are the other challenges that are posed by Bangladesh as an external state actor to India's internal security? The insurgency in Northeast. And you can mention here that in past there have been several insurgent organizations in Northeast which were having their safe havens and terrorist training centers in Bangladesh. You can give example of Ulfa, right? So how Ulfa used to operate out of Bangladesh and used to carry out its activities in Assam, and that has been something which has been of concern as far as Bangladesh as an external state actor is concerned. Then third, you can talk about human trafficking that exists on Indo-Bangladesh border and how Bangladesh is posing a challenge to India's internal security through this entire trade of flesh trade that is taking place across India-Bangladesh border. That's also another internal security concern which Bangladesh poses as an external state to India's internal security. D, you can mention about the increasing proximity of China with Bangladesh. Is also another major threat to India's internal security, because see, what you need to understand is that as China is trying to establish its footprint in Bangladesh, it is now having a footprint in Bay of Bengal as well. In India's neighborhood, right in India's neighborhood, China is sitting because Bangladesh has provided them access. China has provided a line of credit to Bangladesh. China has also started to develop a port in Bangladesh. So as a result of it, India is being encircled by China because Bangladesh has given a foot to China in its own territory. right? So that is also something that you can talk about, increasing proximity of China with Bangladesh, right? Then another issue that you can highlight is cattle smuggling, the issue of cattle smuggling across India-Bangladesh border. As per reports, it is estimated that almost 1 lakh cattle is illegally smuggled from India to Bangladesh every year. In fact, some people say that India can literally starve Bangladesh to death, because a lot of this cattle serves on the food of on the plate of the Bangladesh citizens and Bangladesh population. So the cattle smuggling that is taking place across India-Bangladesh border is also a major internal security concern, especially given the highly sentimental value which is associated with cattle in India, right? And how it can become into a major political issue as well. So that is also something which you can talk about. Then you can also talk about increasing fundamentalist or increasing fundamentalism in Bangladesh society, which is sure to have some kind of repercussions on the Indian society as well. In Bangladesh society is also something which can have a severe effect on India's communal harmony and India's communal bonhomie as well, right? So these are some of the things that can be mentioned by you when we talk about what are the challenges that Bangladesh poses as an external state actor to India's internal security. देखिएगा एक बार, कुछ चीज समझ में नहीं आई हो, something you have not been able to understand or pick, please feel free to ask them, right? You can also talk about that, see, this increasing fundamentalism in Bangladesh society will have repercussions on the Indian society in a sense that it can lead to radicalization and polarization in the Indian society, right? It can have ripple effects on the Indian society as well, something which is not conducive for a society such as India, okay? So how Bangladesh as a nation poses challenges to India's internal security as an external state actor, poses threats to India's internal security, is something that we need to mention here, right? Now, the next state that we need to discuss that poses challenges to India's internal security as an external state is Myanmar. So let's talk about what are the challenges that Myanmar as a nation state poses to India's internal security. Right? Now, when we talk about the challenges that Myanmar poses to India's internal security, what are the challenges? First and foremost, you talk about the Rohingya refugee crisis, which has problems of snowballing into something really big into Indian society as well. देखो बार बार जो वहां पर the way the military junta is trying to crack down against the Rohingya Muslims, and because a number of them are now seeking refuge in India, it is creating communal tension in India. It is creating a pressure on India's natural resources. See, we as a nation are already overpopulated. We do not have enough scope for taking more refugees and more people in distress. There is no doubt that as a responsible country, as the world leader, we should try and project ourselves as someone who will try to protect the basic rights of the people. But at the same time, all of it cannot come at the cost of our own internal security. This Rohingya crisis is creating major communal tension in India. Right? Political parties are using it as a tool for trying to polarize the population in India. So that is one, how Myanmar as an external state is posing threat to India's internal security. Secondly, you can also talk about the insurgency in Northeast. Again, same point as Bangladesh. Several insurgent groups in Northeast are surviving simply because they have their safe havens in Myanmar, right? So several insurgent groups operational in Northeast have their safe haven in Myanmar. They have their training outfits or training centers in Myanmar. They train there, they come and conduct their activities here in India, and then they run away to Myanmar again. So that is another challenge. Then you can also talk about that Myanmar is also a part of the Golden Triangle, and therefore drug trafficking, narco trafficking on Indo-Myanmar border is posing a major challenge to India's internal security. One, not just because Myanmar is in India's vicinity, which is one of the major drug producing region of the world. India is becoming a transit hub for drugs. That is, drug trade is taking place through India. India एक transit route बन चुका है. Secondly, Indian society is also becoming a consumer of these narco substances, these drugs, as a result of which it poses challenges to India's internal security on that particular front as well. So that is also something which we can highlight when we talk about the issues associated with, when we talk about what challenges Myanmar poses to India's internal security. See, then of course what you need to talk about is as well that there is military rule in Myanmar, right? As a result of it, it becomes very difficult to hold diplomatic talks and to resolve the various issues that may emerge. Diplomacy becomes a major challenge, and finding diplomatic solution is very challenging with a military junta, with a military government that has been installed in Myanmar. So that is also something that can be highlighted by you, that how Myanmar is posing challenges to India's internal security, right? Trafficking in arms is also something that can be mentioned by you, that Indo-Myanmar border is a major route for arms trafficking. Okay, so that's also something that can be highlighted by you when we talk about the various challenges that exist on the Indo-Myanmar border and the challenges that Myanmar as an external state poses to India's internal security. Yes? Any questions still here? Any questions still here? There is one question that has been asked regarding the recently passed law of China regarding border management. See, first and foremost, you need to understand we are dealing with the topic of internal security. Hai na? So now when we try to pull the topics from international relations into internal security, it will become very difficult for me to deal with those particular topics. One is that. Second is, this particular topic will be dealt in your monthly current affairs classes. Okay, जो आपका monthly current affairs का magazine आएगा, अभी recent I think December का magazine आएगा, उसके अंदर that particular issue will be dealt with. So either in internal security and most probably it will be in international relations that we will be dealing with that particular topic. Okay, now यहां तक इसमें कोई issue है तो बता दो. Is there any problem? Right? How these countries as external state actors are posing challenges to India's internal security. Now, what are the challenges that our dear neighbor Pakistan poses to India's internal security as an external state actor? Right? Challenges posed by Pakistan as an external state actor to India's internal security is what we will be dealing with next. So let's talk about that as well. Now, first and foremost, cross-border terrorism. Right? Cross-border terrorism, militancy in Kashmir, Pakistan after 1971 realized that there is only one way of fighting against the Indian state, and that is through a proxy war, because they realized that getting into a conventional war with India is not possible. And that is where it started to use the tool of radicalization in Kashmiri society, and also started to train the disgruntled, disenchanted youth in Kashmir and in Pakistan to go and fight in Kashmir with the Indian state security agencies. That is how the origin of militancy began. Right? If you look at the history of Kashmir from 1940s, from the time of independence and roundabout till 1970s, 80s, you will find that, yes, see, there were voices of dissent, there were problems. JKLF as an organization had also come up. There was, people were asking for, there was a separatist movement that was going on in Kashmir, but it is not something turned into a violent movement. There were problems, and those problems continued with the regular forces of democracy. But number of things, the withdrawal of the Soviet forces from Afghanistan in 1980 when the Soviet war ended resulted in a situation where Pakistan was the partner of US इन सोवियत वॉर. अगर आपको सोवियत वॉर के बारे में पता हो, आपने वर्ल्ड हिस्ट्री की क्लासेस अटेंड करी होंगी, तो उसमें आपको यह पता होगा दैट सोवियत वॉर में इट इज पाकिस्तान्स आईएसआई दैट जॉइंड हैंड्स विद अमेरिका in order to train mercenaries from across the globe, to train terrorists from across the globe to fight against the Soviet. The plank that they would use would be religion. Why? Because they would say that, see, look at communists, these communists, they do not believe in any religion. ये लोग तो तुम्हें उठा के फेंक देंगे, तुम्हारे इस्लाम, religion वगैरह सबको खत्म कर देंगे. So mercenaries from across the world, especially from Saudi Arabia and Africa, were trained by the CIA and the ISI to fight against the Soviet in a guerrilla warfare against the Soviet. सोवियत लड़ते रहे सालों साल, कुछ नहीं हो पाया. ISI को रियलाइज हुआ कि अगर यार ये टेक्निक प्रॉक्सी वॉर की काम कर जाती है, बिकॉज सी दिस वाज आल्सो द पीरियड ऑफ कोल्ड वॉर. US could not have got into a direct conflict with Soviet. So they realized that we need to use a proxy to fight against the Americans, to fight against the Soviet. And Afghanistan, as per US, was a very important area because they believed that whoever will control Afghanistan would be able to control the entire Gulf. So they did not want Afghanistan to fall into lap of Soviet. So whom did they find? They found ISI. They started providing money to ISI. They started providing funds to train these mercenaries to fight against the Soviet. One of these mercenaries was Osama bin Laden. Right? And देखिए, बुरा करोगे तो बुरा ही होगा. यूएस ने अब उसामा बिन लादेन को ट्रेन किया और उसको खड़ा किया सोवियत के खिलाफ. एंड वन डे उसामा बिन लादेन हिमसेल्फ टर्न्ड अगेंस्ट द यूएस. टुडे पाकिस्तान इज ट्रेनिंग एंड नर्चरिंग दीज टेररिस्ट इन दिस बैकयार्ड. बट देखो, अगर आप अपने बैकयार्ड में सांप पालोगे तो सांप किसी ना किसी दिन आपको भी काटेगा. What happened in Pakistan few years back? Peshawar attacks. So many children of the armed forces personnel were gunned down in Peshawar in a school. By whom? By the terrorists themselves. भाई फ्रैंकेनस्टाइन मॉन्स्टर बना दिया आपने. तो यूएस की इस प्रॉक्सी वॉर की स्ट्रैटेजी को देखते हुए कि भैया कोई और लड़ेगा हमारे बिहाफ पे सोवियत के साथ, पाकिस्तान को रियलाइज हुआ यार ये तो बहुत सही स्ट्रैटेजी है. लेट अस ट्रेन मिलिटेंट्स हियर इन पाकिस्तान एंड देन दे विल गो एंड फाइट अगेंस्ट इंडिया. वी विल नेवर बी इन अ डायरेक्ट कॉन्फ्लिक्ट विद इंडिया बिकॉज डायरेक्ट कॉन्फ्लिक्ट में आए तो इंडिया मारेगा हमें बहुत. 71 वॉर में इंडिया टुक मोर देन 90,000 प्रिजनर्स ऑफ वॉर ऑफ पाकिस्तान. इतनी बड़ी डिफीट किसी नेशन ने फेस नहीं की होगी इन मॉडर्न टाइम्स. So Pakistan after that realized that there is no way of us to fight against India by conventional war. Let us fight a proxy war against India. And second thing, they started developing nuclear weapons. That is how the origin of militancy in Kashmir happened. See, because Pakistan realized that they have taken away Bangladesh from us. We will take away Kashmir from them. And The Ziaul Haq's strategy was to bleed India by 1,000 cuts. He said कि हम इंडिया को 1000 हिस्सों में बांट देंगे. How? By proxy war. That's how militancy in Kashmir began. And then there was corruption in the administrative machinery in Kashmir. Unemployment was there. You know, there was not adequate attention that had been paid by the central government. Political parties were corrupt. So the conditions were very ripe in Kashmir to use it as a place for radicalization of the local population. So in the name of religion, Pakistan started to radicalize the local population, and a large number of local youth started to join the militancy movement in the name of religion. That's how militancy began in Kashmir. I have mentioned about a number of these things and what are the steps to deal with militancy in Kashmir in the handout that I have shared with you. Please do read it once. But Pakistan as an external state actor, the biggest threat they pose to India's internal security is by cross-border terrorism and the militancy that they have been trying to promote in India. So how Pakistan operates a number of these, sleeper cells in India. ISI has been majorly involved in operating a number of sleeper cells and sponsoring a number of terrorist organizations in India. Right? So that is how Pakistan as a nation poses major security threats to India. That is one. Second is that if there is one nation in this world which prints more currency of some other country than its own currency, it's Pakistan. Fake Indian currency notes, smuggling of fake Indian currency notes into India is one of the major threats that Pakistan poses as an external state actor to India's internal security. Because it has potential to disturb India's economic sovereignty as a nation. Then you can also talk about drug trafficking, narco trafficking across Indo-Pakistan border, in Punjab, Rajasthan, is also something that is of major concern to the Indian internal security agencies. Right? Then, how Pakistan as an external state actor is also posing threat to India is because of its proximity and its all-weather friendship with China. So Pakistan and China say, Bhaiya, we are all-weather friends. All-weather friendship of China with Pakistan is also a major threat. I'll tell you why. Because China has a large number of troops that are deployed. Large number of Chinese troops are deployed in the POK, which is a disputed region. And not to forget, Pakistan is also providing access to China through its territory for this entire One Belt, One Road initiative, maritime Silk Route, etc. and falana and so many other things, which is again causing a problem to India. Gwadar port उठा के उन्होंने पूरा China को दे दिया. अब बे ऑफ बंगाल में तो प्रेजेंस बना ही रहे थे, इंडियन ओशन में भी बना रहे हैं, अरेबियन सी में भी बना रहे हैं. Then Sri has given them one port. So China is trying to encircle India. Strings of pearl. You must have heard about strings of pearls in your international relations classes. Strings of pearls. So all feather friendship. Pakistan and China say that our friendship is higher than the Himalayas, deeper than the oceans, and sweeter than honey. That's how how Chinese and Pakistan describe their relationship with each other. But of course, two rogue nations will always find each other best enemies. Chor chor mosere bhai. And enemies your best friend. Pakistan ka enemy भी common है, China का enemy भी common है. So both of them have joined hands with each other. That is the major challenge that is there. In case there is a conflict that breaks out between India and China, the trouble that we will be facing on the Indo-Pakistan or the Indo-Pakistan border is also something which we need to keep in mind, because there are Chinese troops who are sitting in POK right now as we are talking. right? So that's also one of the ways in which China as a nation, Pakistan as a nation poses challenges to India's internal security. Then you should also talk about that, see, how Pakistan is always at the top of its voice in order to stall all the international alliances that India tries to stitch. NSG में एंटर करना है, पाकिस्तान विल से हम क्यों नहीं. NPT में एंटर करना है, पाकिस्तान विल, NPT को ये करना है, दे विल से हम क्यों नहीं. UN सिक्योरिटी काउंसिल में चाइना विल ट्राई टू अपोज ऑन बिहेस्ट ऑफ पाकिस्तान, हम क्यों नहीं. So this is the biggest problem, right? So stalling all the international alliances that India is trying to stitch with the other countries of the world and at the global forum is also something that we can talk about, how Pakistan as a nation poses challenges to India's internal security, right? And then see, of course, you should also talk about that Pakistan's support to Taliban is also a major threat to India's internal security, because see, you are making the entire neighborhood of India very unstable and prone to threats and prone to a lot of internal security issues. So that is also something that can be highlighted, how Pakistan as a nation poses challenges to India's internal security, right? Is this clear to everyone? Challenges posed by Pakistan as an external state actor to India's internal security. Then let's talk about Nepal. What are the challenges that Nepal as a nation poses to India's internal security? It's something that we will be dealing with now. Now, see, first and foremost is a large number of fake Indian currency notes make their way into India from Nepal. Second is the support to the Indian Maoist groups, Indian left-wing extremist group from Nepal. We already know that in Nepal, the left-wing extremist party, the Maoist parties, are actually mainstream parties. So we have already discussed about how 40 Maoists in 2009, as per MHA reports, were trained in Nepal. Then you can also talk about that how the Indo-Nepal border is also one of the most favorite spots for organized criminals. A large number of organized criminals in India tend to run away to Nepal to seek refuge for themselves because of the weak enforcement of law and order, etc. in Nepal. Okay, so that is also something which can be mentioned here. And then you can also mention about militancy in Punjab in the past was also promoted through Nepal border. And you can talk about the proximity, growing proximity of China with Nepal. आपको पता है चाइना ने नेपाल के अंदर मैंडरिन एजुकेशन को फ्री स्पॉन्सर कर दिया है. वहां पे मैंडरिन सिखाया जा रहा है नेपाली स्कूलों के अंदर. आप सोच के देखिए. This is how they are trying to establish their presence in Nepal and trying to view Nepal towards its side. They are trying to encircle India in whichever way possible that they can, Chinese. Right? So that's also something that can be highlighted by you. And then you can talk about the growing radicalization of the youth. Growing radicalization of youth on Indo-Nepal border. By various radical elements present in Nepal is also of a growing concern to India. Okay, so there have been several reports that how a large number of youth in that part of the country is being radicalized by the various forces inimical to India's interest present in Nepal. So challenges that are posed by Nepal as an external state actor to India's internal security. Yes. Now, what are challenges that are posed by Afghanistan to India's internal security? See, first and foremost, presence of Taliban. When a terrorist group is ruling Afghanistan, you can always expect that it would lead to instability in the region. Instability in the region would always lead to the presence of external forces in the region. That has led to presence of external forces in the region. Now, see, अगर external countries region में रहेंगी तो ये हमेशा इंडिया की position as a regional superpower को challenge करेगा, right? So presence of external forces in the region challenges India's dominance as a regional superpower, right? For the interference by foreign countries, etc. Then of course we need to talk about that Afghanistan is a part of the Golden Crescent, which includes your Afghanistan, Iran and Pakistan, you know. So these three countries, Iran, Pakistan and Afghanistan, form the part of the Golden Crescent, Eastern Iran basically. And when we talk about the the issue with Afghanistan is that the narco trafficking that happens in Afghanistan, ये मैं आपको पहले भी बता चुका हूँ, it is controlled by Taliban, and that is also posing a major internal security threat to India, especially because a lot of these drugs are actually going to make their way into India, right? Leading to increased drug consumption in the Indian society as well. So अभी तक हमने क्या क्या डिस्कस कर लिया है? We have discussed about Bangladesh, we have discussed about Myanmar, we have discussed about Pakistan, we have discussed about Nepal, we have discussed about Afghanistan as an external state actor posing challenges to India's internal security. What are the various challenges that they are posing? ठीक है? Let's finish this particular topic, then we will go into a break. ज़्यादा कुछ बचा नहीं है अभी. इसके बाद anyway after this topic the next topic that I will be dealing with would be terrorism, and with that we will end our syllabus. Okay, now apart from Afghanistan, which are the other countries that are posing challenges to India's internal security as an external state actor? अब China बचा है of course, है ना? So let's talk about China. Threats posed by China as an external state actor to India's internal security. See, इसके अंदर तो बहुत सारी चीजें लिखने को. You can mention about strings of pearls, how China is trying to encircle India, right? Then you can also talk about the dumping of cheap Chinese manufactured goods into the Indian market, and therefore destroying India's domestic manufacturing base. India's domestic manufacturing to a large extent has been affected because of the dumping of these cheap Chinese goods that are produced at large scale in China. So that is also something that can be highlighted by you when we talk about challenges that China poses to India's internal security, right? Then you can also talk about the relationship that China has with Pakistan and the kind of relationship that they are trying to develop with other neighboring countries. You can talk about cyber warfare. There have been several instances in the recent past where attacks have taken place on important infrastructural installations as well as the websites of the Indian internal security agencies by the Chinese cyber warfare, right? Chinese have been raising an army of cyber warriors. So that's also something that can be highlighted by you when we talk about China. Of course, you can talk about the ideological support to Maoism in India. You remember I told you when we were discussing about Naxalism and Maoism in India that how a number of when this entire Naxalbari movement happened, the Mao Zedong referred to it as the Spring Thunder. So there was an ideological support to Maoism, and it has also been alleged that there has been covert support to insurgency in Northeast, covert support to insurgency in Northeast is also something that can be highlighted by you when we talk about the various challenges that China poses as an external state actor to India's internal security. And then you have to remember water wars. See, this is something that we have been ignoring as a nation. China is building 1,000 dam project, and in this project they also plan to control the waters of river Brahmaputra, which is also called as Sangpo in China. If China is successful in that particular project, it is going to cause a lot of problems in northeast and eastern India and in Bangladesh. So the Chinese project of building these dams to control the waters of rivers such as Brahmaputra can also pose a major challenge to India going ahead in the future, especially given the kind of climate change vagaries that we have been facing in the country. Right? So that is also something that we can talk about, how China as a nation poses challenges to India's internal security. Hanji, any questions? Any doubts? Now let's talk about Sri Lanka. Bhutan also poses challenges to India's internal security in a way that there have been insurgent groups in the past, those who had their safe havens in Bhutan, and secondly also the Doklam issue, and how China is trying to increase its proximity with Bhutan and trying to get into a land swap deal with Bhutan, which can be a major concern for India's internal security, because then China would be present right in the vicinity of India when it comes to the Siliguri corridor. Okay. Now Sri Lanka. What are the challenges that Sri Lanka as a nation poses to India's internal security? See, first and foremost, you need to talk about the proximity with China. इसमें आप हम्बनटोटा पोर्ट के बारे में बात कर सकते हो. That has been given to China for civilian use के लिए दिया था, military port बना दिया उसको. हम्बनटोटा पोर्ट. You would know about हम्बनटोटा port. You must have read about it in your internal security class, in your international relations classes, right? Then you can also talk about that Sri Lanka, the issue that we have with the killing of the fishermen killing, and there are frequent attacks that keep taking place on Indian fishermen by the Sri Lankan Navy and by the Sri Lankan fishermen. See, one of the major reasons for that also is because Indian fishermen are much more advanced and developed as compared to the Sri Lankan fishermen. So the Sri Lankan fishermen also always fear a threat that their catch would be affected as a result of the fishermen, those who are coming in from India with big trawlers and big machines, etc. And then lastly, you can talk about the Tamilian crisis, the Tamilian crisis in Sri Lanka. The civil war in Sri Lanka and the Tamilian crisis in Sri Lanka, where the Sri Lankan government has been very harsh and hard on the Tamilians in Sri Lanka, it has potential to disturb the domestic politics in India. And what else can be the example of this Sri Lankan Tamil crisis affecting India, that we lost one of our prime minister to this Sri Lankan Tamil crisis, right? So potential to disturb the domestic politics. Kachatibu Island के बारे में भी आपको पता होगा, उसका बारे में भी आप mention कर सकते हो. How Sri Lanka poses challenge to India's internal security as an external state actor. Yes, so these are some of the pointers that can be mentioned by you when we talk about what are the challenges that each of these state poses to India's internal security as an external state actor. This year's mains examination, UPSC asked a question: what are the challenges that are posed by non-state actors and external state actors to India's internal security? External state actors are these: non-state actors, terrorist groups, insurgent groups, Naxalites, NGOs, civil society organizations which not NGOs and civil society organizations, but some NGOs and civil society organizations which work counterproductive to India's interest, national interest. There have been some NGOs in the past which have been banned for being involved in anti-India activities. So those kind of organizations, right? Then of course you have the organized criminals also fall into non-state actors posing challenges to India's internal security. तो आपको उसके अंदर बहुत सारे pointers, ये सारी चीजें जो है जितनी आप mention कर सकते थे वो mention करनी थी आंसर के अंदर, right? So we are done with the topic of role of external state actor in creating challenges to India's internal security. The last topic that is left to be discussed now is terrorism and the problem of global terrorism. So we'll go into a break. Once we are back from the break, we will discuss the topic of terrorism and we'll call off the classes. Okay, so that will be our discussion for the syllabus for the entire internal security, right? In case you have any questions related to whatever we have just discussed, right, you please send it to the class coordinator. We'll take up those questions after the break. I'll see you in a few minutes. Okay, so now let's start with the last topic, and that is the topic of global terrorism and the various issues associated with terrorism. Is there a way to increase the brightness of the screen? God only knows. Okay. Now, first and foremost, what is the definition? What is the meaning of terrorism? As far as international community is concerned, there is no agreeable definition of terrorism globally. No country has been able to comprehensively define terrorism and or been able to make the rest of the international community agree upon the definition of terrorism. What that essentially tells us is that we are fighting against a problem which we have not even defined. So you can expect what can be the outcome. So first and foremost, let us try to understand the definition of terrorism. What are the various definitions that have been given for terrorism? Especially we will understand the definition of terrorism that has been provided by the second ARC. We will look at the definition of terrorism that has been provided by the FBI. And then we will try to look at some of the other aspects of terrorism. So definition of terrorism. As I said, that defining terrorism is a really difficult task. See, one of the major causes for that is because it is always said that one man's terrorist is another man's freedom fighter. What is happening in Kashmir is cited as terrorism by India, but several countries in Islamic world, especially Pakistan, call it as a freedom movement that is happening against the atrocities that are committed by the Indian state against the Kashmiris. So in this situation, it becomes very difficult to define terrorism. People have also gone into definition of defining good and bad terrorists. To be very honest, there is nothing like good or bad terrorist. Terrorism means terrorism. When you use violence in an indiscriminate manner to kill people, to achieve your objectives, that is terrorism. Whether you are state, whether you are an individual, or whether you are a group, terrorism means terrorism. There should be no good or bad terrorism. But unfortunately, in present day world, we have ended up defining terrorism into categories of good and bad terrorism depending upon our convenience as nation states. In fact, terrorism as a tool is used by nation states today in order to further their political objectives and strategic objectives. Look at Pakistan, for example. The same very nation which launched a war on terror after 9/11 attacks was the one which harbored these terrorists, which harbored these extremists to fight against the Soviet. And then a few years later, these terrorists themselves, they turned against the nation which had trained them and which had brought up these particular terrorists and mercenaries. So, it says that the term has different meaning for different people. International community has not been successful in developing an accepted comprehensive definition of terrorism. During 1970s and 80s, United Nations attempts to define the term were wasted mainly due to the differences of opinion between the various members of the international community about the use of violence in context of conflict over national liberation and self-determination. Some people say that what is happening in Palestine is not terrorism. It is a self-determination movement. Now, what do you say in defense of that? Similarly, some people say that the insurgency that is going on in Nagaland is also a self-determination movement and it is in no way extremism or terrorism. These divergences have made it impossible to conclude a comprehensive convention on international terrorism that incorporates a single all-encompassing, legally binding criminal law definition of terrorism. So, India is one country that has suffered the most at the hands of terrorism. And let me tell you, till 9/11 attacks, United States of America and the rest of the Western world was not ready to accept that there is something called as global terrorism and international terrorism that has been thriving. It's only after when they were bit by this bug that they realized that we need to take some action now. India made an attempt at the UN level in 1996 in form of Comprehensive Convention on International Terrorism, which we will be discussing in a bit, CCIT, by trying to define international terrorism. But the global community has not been able to come to terms and come to a common agreement on what terrorism should mean. So let's look at the definition of terrorism as per the FBI. The FBI says that terrorism is the unlawful use of force or violence against persons or property to intimidate or coerce a government, the civilian population or any segment thereof in furtherance of political objectives of particular organization. When we look at the definition that has been provided by the second ARC, it becomes even more clear to us what exactly terrorism would mean. The second Administrative Reforms Commission says that terrorism is an anxiety-inspiring method of repeated violent action employed by semi-clandestine individuals, groups or state actors for idiosyncratic, criminal or political reasons whereby the direct targets of violence are not the main targets. Remember this, in a terror attack, the direct targets of violence are actually not the main targets of violence. You have to remember that. When the bomb blast happened in Delhi Metro or when the terrorist attacks happened in Mumbai, 26/11 attacks, they were not targeted at those innocent people, those who were sitting at Leopold Cafe in Mumbai, or those people, those who were moving around in Chhatrapati Shivaji Terminal in Mumbai. They were not the main targets. The main target was someone else. The main target was the Indian state. The main target was the Indian society, to create a terror in the minds of the Indian state and the Indian society and to make them aware that, see, the terrorists are here. So it says that the immediate human victims of violence are generally chosen randomly or selectively from a target population and serve as a message generator. Remember this, terrorists, their main objective is to spread their propaganda and to spread their message far and wide. Any means of violence which they use is to actually grab attention of the people. So threat and violence based communication processes between the terrorist organization victim and main targets are used to manipulate the main target, turning it into a target of terror, a target of demands or a target of attention, depending upon whether the intimidation, coercion or propaganda is primarily sought. So they basically use these innocent civilians or targets in order to reach some of their objective. That is what we need to understand by terrorism. So terrorism is an extremist activity that is carried on by non-state actors or even state through non-state actors in order to use violence and means of violence, extreme means of violence to cause chaos and terror in the society. The objective is to essentially create some kind of a turmoil in the society. That is what terrorism tries to achieve. Now, what are some of the features of terrorism? You remember we had discussed about features of organized crime, features of organized criminal groups. Similarly, what are some of the features of terrorism that we need to be aware of as students of internal security? First and foremost, the strategy of the terrorist is to commit act of violence that draws the attention of the local population, the government and the world to their cause. So you please underline this in your notes. The strategy of the terrorist is to commit acts of violence that draws the attention of local population and the government and the world to their cause. Their objective is to obtain greatest publicity for their acts. To obtain greatest publicity for their acts. The effectiveness of the terrorist act lies not just in the act itself, but in the public or government's reaction to the act. Remember this, terrorists would always be involved in the terrorist act to evoke a response from the state, to evoke a response from the citizens. Then, more than the immediate victims, terror attacks try to inculcate fear in the minds of the viewer. Why would they take the planes in 9/11 attacks and bang them right into the World Trade Center? They wanted to make a spectacle out of it. See, they could have caused much more damage to America by hitting some other buildings. But why did they only choose the World Trade Tower? The reason for that is they wanted to make it a great event, something that would remain etched in the minds of the people for years to come. Right? It does not accept any limitation on their actions, such as international law, moral constraints, sympathy towards weaker section, etc. They don't care about all of these things. They don't care about international law. They don't have any aspect related to moral constraints or sympathy towards weaker sections, etc. They don't care about all of these things. Now the question is that what has led to this situation? What are the causes of terrorism? Why is international global terrorism today engulfing the entire global community? All the nations in the world in some way or the other are affected by terrorism. Even those nations which promote terrorism, such as Pakistan, are affected by terrorism. See, the biggest irony of our times, right now, what are the causes of terrorism? Now see, first and foremost, you need to understand that there is no one specific cause of terrorism, right? There are multiple causes, socio-economic causes, political causes, etc. and so on and so forth. So let's try to look at most definition of terrorism. Recognize that terrorists don't just pursue violence for the sake of it, but they have a specific purpose for carrying out their attacks. Research has shown that there are a number of possible causes for terrorist activity. These include social and political injustice. A lot of times, terrorists act on the belief that they have been stripped of their basic socio-economic rights. They have been denied the right to development, and that's why they should be using violence as a means to achieve their objectives. Left-wing extremists used violence as a means because they believed that they have been hard done by the state, they have not been given the correct treatment by the state, and therefore we should be using violence in order to achieve our goals. So terrorists acting on this basis, that is, some people turn to terrorism when they are trying to tackle what they perceive as social injustice. They believe that they have been stripped of something that they feel entitled to, such as their certain rights, land or possession. So they use violence as a means to make their voice heard. That could be one. See, I'm not trying to give a justification for terrorism here. Please don't tell कि अरे सर तो टेररिस्ट सिंपैथाइजर हैं, यहाँ पे टेररिज्म को जस्टिफाई कर रहे हैं. टेररिज्म को जस्टिफाई नहीं कर रहे सर. हमें एग्जाम के अंदर कुछ आंसर भी लिखना है ना. सो सोशल एंड पॉलिटिकल इंजस्टिस. और मैंने यहाँ पे क्या लिखा है देखो, बड़ा इंटरेस्टिंग चीज लिखी है. They believe that they have been stripped of something they feel which they were entitled to, and therefore they are entitled to now use violence as a means to achieve their objectives. Then strategic. Terrorism is used as a strategy of the weak nations to try and gain advantage against stronger armies or political powers. Pakistan realized after 71 कि भैया देखो इंडिया से नहीं लड़ सकते हम, कैसे लड़ेंगे? India is a big country, much bigger than us, growing into an economic superpower. 71 में, आज से 50 साल पहले हमने उनको इतनी बुरी तरीके से पीटा. आप सोचिए, do you really think that they would ever imagine to fight against India again? They had lost all their self-pride. That's what they realized, that the only way for us to fight against India is in what is called as an asymmetric warfare. See, proxy war which Pakistan has launched against India is an asymmetric war, where a small nation is trying to fight against a big nation, but by the use of some proxy. उनको पता है ये बात कि ये asymmetric war है. How else do you think small organizations have been able to shake the roots of countries such as United States of America? Al-Qaeda कितना ही बड़ा हो जाएगा कि अमेरिका को हिला दिया, पूरी दुनिया हिला दी, right? So saying that a group has a strategic cause for using terrorism is another way of saying that terrorism isn't a random or crazy choice, but it is chosen as a tactic in service of a larger goal. Hamas, for example, uses terrorist tactics, but not out of a random desire to fire rockets at Israeli Jewish civilians. Instead, they seek to leverage violence in order to gain specific concessions related to their goal vis-a-vis Israel. Why did the Kandahar hijacking happen? They were not doing it for fun. They were doing it in order to get a release for their colleagues and for the terrorists which had been lodged in the Tihar jail in Delhi. Then of course, religious causes also. See, you have to understand one thing. Religion per se is not a problem, but the misuse, misinterpretation and fundamentalism associated with religion can become a problem and can lead to terrorist organizations using it as a plank for themselves. If you look at several terrorist organizations today, they use religion as a plank. They say that we have launched the holy war. See, where did this entire issue of holy war, jihad in the modern times come from? As I was telling you, when Soviet had invaded Afghanistan, Islamists across the world were given a call by the ISI and by the CIA by telling that, see, these communists are atheists. They are going to destroy your religion. You want to protect your religion, to protect your tradition, to protect your culture, you need to fight. You need to fight the holy war of jihad against these Soviet. That's how religion is used to indoctrinate. And let me tell you one thing. दुनिया में कोई एक ऐसी चीज नहीं है सिंगुलरली रिलीजन के अलावा जो कि इंसान को इस तरीके से इंडोक्ट्रिनेट कर दे. रिलीजन के नाम पे आदमी कुछ भी कर सकता है. उसका एक रीजन भी है. अगर आप साइकोलॉजिकल टेक्स्ट पढ़ेंगे, अगर आप बहुत सारे टेक्स्ट पढ़ेंगे तो आपको रियलाइज होगा क्यों रिलीजन ही क्यों, कम्युनिटी ही क्यों. Because for a lot of people that is the only identity that they have. That is the only identity that they have. That's why in name of religion, in name of nation, you can make people do anything. लोग अपने को मारने के लिए तैयार हो जाते हैं रिलीजन और देश के नाम पे. क्यों? क्योंकि आइडेंटिटी की बात है और कोई आइडेंटिटी है नहीं, तो उस आइडेंटिटी को प्रोटेक्ट करना जो है. Right? So throughout the history, religious causes have been the motivation for a variety of terrorist attack, though it is important to remember that religions themselves do not cause terrorism. ये बड़ी आजकल धारणा फैल गई है. कि ये रिलीजन प्रमोट करता है। अरे रिलीजन ने थोड़ी ना प्रमोट किया है, लोग प्रमोट कर रहे हैं उस रिलीजन को मिस इंटरप्रेट करते हुए। आप किसी भी रिलीजन को कैसे भी मिस इंटरप्रेट करके, लोगों को इंडोक्ट्रिनेट करके, यू कैन यूज इट टू कॉज वायलेंस, राइट? So religious terrorists may use terrorism to punish what they see as ungodly behavior in society, or to avenge what they perceive as attacks on their beliefs. Religious terrorism is not always about one faith attacking another. Experts began to argue in 1990s that a new form of terrorism fueled by religious fervors was on the rise. They pointed to organizations such as Al-Qaeda, etc. And religious ideas such as martyrdom were seen as particularly dangerous. Such groups selectively interpret and exploit religious concepts and texts to support terrorism. Religious themselves do not cause terrorism. ये बड़ा इंपॉर्टेंट एस्पेक्ट है, आप देखिएगा। देखो, कोई बोल सकता है कि जी ये रिलीजियस टेक्स्ट में ये प्रॉब्लम है, वो रिलीजियस। आप मुझे बात बताओ, रिलीजियस टेक्स्ट में बहुत सारी और चीजें भी तो लिखी हैं, क्या उनको रिलीजियसली फॉलो कर रहे हो? हाँ, आर यू फॉलोइंग दैट रिलीजियसली, दैट यू आर गोइंग एंड सेइंग दैट इन द नेम ऑफ द रिलीजन यू विल गो एंड किल इनोसेंट पीपल? So, misinterpretation of religion, misusing religion for political goals. And let me tell you, ये जो सबसे बड़े रिलीजन का झंडा उठा के चलते हैं ना, वो खुद रिलीजियस नहीं होते। जिन्ना himself was a non-believer, but he wanted us another nation for Muslims, right? Socio-economic. Research has shown that deprivation, lack of education, etc. can also drive people to terrorism. It is believed that people in these situations may be more susceptible to recruitment by organizations using terror tactics. We have already discussed about this in case of Naxalism, so we already know. And then the globalization and the increasing inequality in the society. See, the good part about globalization is that it has connected people, but the bad part is that it has also made people aware of the inequalities that exist in the society. So, according to many, globalization has created the structures and institutions which fuel terrorist movement. Decades of globalization has produced one of the greatest disparities in economic conditions of the countries of the world. Global inequality has reached extraordinary levels. आप देखिए, अभी Oxfam की रिपोर्ट आई है, which talks about that how in 2021 many millionaires in India have actually doubled their wealth. और जो पुअर है वो और पुअरर हो गए। काहे का पैंडेमिक, काहे का स्लो डाउन, काहे का रिसेशन? पीपल दोज हु आर रिच आर बिकमिंग रिचर, वो तो और पैसा कमा रहे हैं, एंड पीपल दोज हु आर पुअर आर बिकमिंग पुअरर, राइट? नाउ व्हाट आर द रीजंस फॉर स्प्रेड ऑफ टेररिज्म? लेट्स ट्राई टू आल्सो टॉक अबाउट व्हाट आर द वेरियस फैक्टर्स दैट हैव हेल्प्ड इन स्प्रेडिंग टेररिज्म ग्लोबली. See, the first thing that you can mention is indoctrination, right? So let's talk about it. The religious belief has become a key means for indoctrinating and training would-be terrorists. Extremists use websites, social media to recruit and radicalize individuals through videos and propaganda. Suicide terrorism, self-sacrifice, martyrdom has been organized and perpetrated by groups with religious motivation. बोलते हैं कि आप जाके ऐसा करोगे तो आपको ऐसा मिलेगा, जन्नत में ये होगा, हेवन में ये होगा। अरे किसने देखा है आफ्टर when you are away from here, right? So religion is used as a very important tool by the terrorists for indoctrination of the would-be terrorists, of the youth, of radicalizing them. Then technology, sophisticated means of communication, electronic media, print media, etc. have helped in faster promotion of terrorist ideology and hate campaigns across the international borders. See, you have to understand, technology is a double-edged sword. It will always be used as a tool by those who want to use it wrongly to cause damage also, right? So it says websites and social media messages are used to provide advice and instructions on how to plan and prepare for attacks, attacking a virtual training camp, etc. There is feeling of alienation and deprivation among the local people, violation of human rights, abuse of dignity. Porosity of border with neighboring countries has also helped in promoting terrorism. How? Movement across the countries has become much more easier. See, I am not saying that technology and globalization are the problem, but the misuse of technology and the ill effects of globalization is what we are talking about here when we talk about the reasons for spread of terrorism. And then of course developmental deficit that exists across the world is also something that can be highlighted by you when we talk about the various issues associated with terrorism. Now, What are the various types of terrorism that exist across the globe? Second, ARC has given this exemplary and very detailed classification of various types of terrorism. First one, it says ethno-nationalist terrorism, that is motivated by ethno-nationalist and separatist aspirations. For example, what we see in Sri Lanka is ethno-national terrorism. Similarly, the Naga insurgency is an example of ethno-national terrorism, where ethnic identity के basis के ऊपर groups are asking for nationality for themselves, right? Similarly, you have religious terrorism also, something which we already know about. The ideology-oriented terrorism, left-wing extremism, right-wing extremism, right? Then state-sponsored terrorism. We know very well about it, right? It says that state-sponsored terrorism or warfare is as old as the history of the military conflict. Such established practices existed in ancient times in the Oriental empires in Rome and Byzantium. But state-sponsored terrorism on a massive scale reappeared in international politics in 1960s and 70s, and today, along with religious terrorism, state-sponsored terrorism has considerably altered the nature of terrorist activities around the world. And see, today a number of nations across the world, ये मैंने यहाँ पे बड़ा interesting point को highlight भी किया है. In recent times, some countries have embraced terrorism as a deliberate instrument of foreign policy. One distinction of state-sponsored terrorism from another form of terrorist activity is that it is initiated to obtain certain clearly defined foreign policy objectives rather than grabbing media attention or targeting the potential audience. And then we have something called as narco-terrorism also. Narco-terrorism is basically when a number of groups that were involved in narco-trafficking themselves started to perform terrorist activities to survive. Something which we have seen in Latin American countries especially. Organized criminal groups थे, narco-trafficking में involved थे, but in order to protect themselves, they started using violent means. So narco-terrorism is also something that can be highlighted here. Though initially used in context of drug trafficking related terrorism in South America, the term has come to be associated with terrorist groups and activities around the world, and more so in Central and Southeast Asia. Now let's talk about what are the effects of terrorism. What are the kind of effects that terrorism can cause on a nation's economy, etc. and so on and so forth. So after the outbreak of terrorism in Basque Country in Spain, in late 1960s, economic growth in region declined by 10%. In Spain, the economic effects of terrorism has been that the growth of the economy declined by 10%. Per capita income in Israel would have been 10% higher if country had avoided terrorism from 2001 to 4. Terrorism and threat thereof can develop greater uncertainty, higher insurance and wage premiums, leading to higher trade transaction costs. Because see, greater uncertainty, that means higher premiums would have to be paid to the insurance companies by the various corporate outfits. Then the investment also suffers in a country that is affected by terrorism. Economic activity suffers. So if the number of terrorist incidents increases in a year in two trading countries, then the trade between the two countries falls in the same year. Tourism is particularly vulnerable to terrorism. The most affected activity due to heightened risk of a loss of investment, foreign direct investment decreases with increasing levels of terrorism in that country. Significant effects on economy of any country can be seen as a result of terrorism. I hope that you people are following me and able to understand all these pointers. Now, further, what are the societal effects? See, you have to also remember the kind of societal effects that terrorism can have. It has potential to destroy the demographic dividend. Youth in their productive years can get attracted to terrorist activities and terrorist organizations and destroy their productive years. Not to forget the fact that it also has the potential of disturbing the communal harmony in the society, because a lot of times terrorism is associated with a religion or two in particular. So it has potential to victimize some of the people. Because of Islamic terrorism, one cannot deny that Muslims across the world have become victim of Islamophobia. So God only knows whether these terrorists are actually trying to promote Islam, because they are causing more damage to the Muslims across the world. That's the unfortunate truth. That's the unfortunate reality. What can I do about it, right? So destroy the demographic dividend has the potential to destroy the communal harmony in the society. It can create distrust in the society and destroy the social capital in the society. What is social capital? The trust that people have with each other, the kind of linkages that people have with each other will be destroyed as a result of the societal effects of terrorism. And then, of course, don't forget the psychological effects that terrorism and terrorist organizations and terrorist activities can cause. The kind of trauma that terrorist activities and terror organizations, trauma that they can cause to individuals is something that is irreversible. It can deeply dent the psychology of the individuals in the society and lead to a lot of cases of people going into depression and a number of other mental illness. See, you have to also remember the kind of effects that terrorism can create on the human rights as well. Terrorism has a direct impact on the enjoyment of a number of human rights, in particular rights to life, liberty, and physical integrity. See, you have to understand, it is because of the terrorism, it is because of terrorist attacks today that there is so much surveillance which is being imposed on us in the name of national security. Today, the state is intruding into each and every aspect of individual's life in the name of national security, because terrorism has caused that situation. When you and I go to the Delhi metro and we are frisked, what are they trying to frisk us for? They are trying to protect us from us. Terrorist acts can destabilize the governments, undermine civil society, jeopardize peace and security, threaten social and economic development, and may especially negatively affect certain groups. It also has an effect on rule of law. See, because when terrorists are using indiscriminate violence to achieve their objectives, you will always find other people also using violence in order to counter the terrorists. Violence becomes a norm in the society. Violence gets justified in the society. Look at what has happened in Kashmir. See, Kashmir में violence को normalize कर दिया गया है अब. State ने, terrorists ने, हर किसी ने वहां पे violence को normalize कर दिया. अब वहां पे it is a part and parcel of each and everyone's life to witness violence on a daily basis. So, has an adverse effect on the establishment of the rule of law, undermines pluralistic civil society, aims at the destruction of democratic basis of the society, destabilizes legitimately constituted governments, etc. and so on and so forth. So these are some of the things that we can talk about. Then further, this is something which has been mentioned with respect to the global terrorism index and where India stands and all of those things. So those things can be used by you in answer. You please read through this on your own. Now, let's talk about what are the present setup that we have in India to deal with terrorism. We have intelligence agencies, we have various counter-terror operation agencies as well, investigation agencies, and we are trying to enhance the center-state relations also with respect to dealing with terrorism. But despite all of this, we have been failing as a nation in fighting against terrorism in the most effective manner. What are the reasons? Let us try to understand what are the various issues in the present setup of dealing with terrorism and terrorist organizations in India. Let us try to look at those particular aspects as well. Right? Now, coordination. First and foremost, to fight against the terrorists, what you require is a coordinated approach between the state police forces, state agencies, central agencies, investigation agencies. Everyone has to act in a single focused manner. But in India, where one police station cannot coordinate properly with the other police station in the vicinity of it, you can very well imagine what can be the problems that will be created as a result of it. So there is absence of coordination among the different agencies, as was evident in the Pathankot attack. Look at what happened in 26/11 attacks also. बार बार इंटेलिजेंस इंफॉर्मेशन दी गई महाराष्ट्र पुलिस को कि कुछ ऐसा होने वाला है, प्लीज बी अवेयर, समथिंग इज गोइंग टू हैपन थ्रू सी. They were sleeping. Lack of coordination, right? Then See, you have to also understand that you cannot be dealing with the terrorists with your, regular approach and regular police machinery. You require people, those who are specifically trained in counter-terrorist operations, to fight against the terrorists. We are still lacking behind when it comes to training and building the capacity of a state police forces and various agencies to deal with terrorism. आप लाठियों से नहीं लड़ोगे टेररिस्ट के खिलाफ जिनके पास AK-47 है, और भी बहुत एडवांस machines हैं उनके पास आज. So even elite forces like NSG suffer from chronic problems of acquisition and training. The state police forces do not take minimum required firing rounds also, right? The human resources, all the agencies face the shortage of staff. This we have discussed earlier. Financial resources and technical resources crunch is also something that we feel. Autonomy, accountability, professional leadership and institutional ethos are all missing in many cases. No heads ever roll in case of failure of intelligence or operations. आप मेरे को एक बात बता दो. India witnessed such a big terror attack in form of Pulwama. They say that almost 700 kgs of RDX made its way into India. Was anyone ever sacked? आपने जाके बस बोला जी हम वहां पे बम गिरा देंगे, we will act against terrorists, ये and all of those things, everything you said. But did you ever sack anyone? You sacked your NSA for lapse in the national security? No. You were just sleeping. The simple reason for that is there is no accountability. Intelligence agencies have been a failure in this country. Time and again. Policing and state, Delhi police for its part has neither specialist equipment nor protocols for dealing with attacks on schools, mall, theater. कोई SOP नहीं है. कहीं पे अटैक हो जाए तो क्या करना है? भागना है, मारना है, पकड़ना है. There is no idea. No one has any clue. Right? Then the political will to carry out the reforms is also missing as far as the state police is concerned. See, and you have to understand, NSG, central government can only deal with terrorism to a certain extent. Central government and NSG cannot be present at all the places. Ultimately, state police has to be trained and their capacity has to be built to fight against the terrorists. Right? So, ये सब चीजें भी कुछ mentioned है. Now, see, lastly, what we need to talk about is that if you really want to fight against terrorism and terrorists, all the countries in the world will have to join hands with each other. This global terrorism today that we face is not just one nation's problem. It is a global problem and it has to be dealt with globally, because terrorist organizations have joined hands with each other today. And they are operating on a pan-national basis and transnational basis. You cannot expect to have a disjointed and a fragmented approach to fight against the terrorists. So coordination, given the number of players involved, the enormity of tasks for counter-terrorism and limited resources available, effective coordination is crucial. Then porous borders are there. आप यहाँ पे terrorist को पकड़ोगे, वो वहाँ भाग जाएंगे, वहाँ पकड़ोगे, यहाँ भाग जाएंगे. भाई, cooperation and coordination between nations is required, and some countries do not have capacity. Do you really think Nepal, Sri Lanka, Bhutan, these kind of countries have any kind of capacity to fight against the terrorists? They need support of the international community. For that matter, even India needs support of the international community to fight against the terrorists today. And then what is the way forward for the international terrorists, for the international community to deal with terrorism is something that I have highlighted here, that there is the requirement for evolving a common definition of terrorism. Probably a UN resolution should be passed on the terrorism, and the draft convention which India had proposed, CCIT, should be passed. Monitoring the activity of the rogue states such as Pakistan. जो ये ऐसे nations हैं ना जो कि terrorism में बार बार involved रहते हैं, we need to take strict action against them, right? Those who are promoting terrorist activities in their backyard. The list of rogue state naming and shaming kind of an activity could be there. Imposing sanctions against state-sponsored terrorism, military action against proscribed terror groups, economic and military aid to weak nation states, effective governance and equal access to economic opportunities to all the nations in the world, policing the cyberspace, because that is also one of the major sources of cyber terror attacks that we have seen in the present day, and countering the false propaganda of the over-the-ground workers and the NGOs, those who work on behest of terrorist organizations behind the scenes but actually make themselves appear as if they are doing some humanitarian job. What are the sources of terror financing? I have mentioned that also here. various sources of terror financing, there is a requirement to crack down on this also. I am expecting a question in mains examination on what are the various sources of terror financing and what are the steps that should be taken in order to fight against that. और ये है CCIT जो इंडिया ने यूएन में इंट्रोड्यूस किया था 1996 में, उसके बारे में थोड़ा सा डिस्कशन कर लेते हैं. In 1996, India moved a resolution at UN by the name of CCIT. After 19 years, it still remains inconclusive. Recently, during the visit of External Affairs Minister Sushma Swaraj to China, India finally got the support of both China and Russia for this very significant resolution. But इसके ऊपर अभी भी कुछ नहीं हुआ. उसका रीजन क्या है? CCIT जो है वो एक comprehensive convention इंडिया ने इंट्रोड्यूस किया, which will try to define terrorism. There will be one single definition of terrorism, no good or bad terrorism. And under this convention, all the terror groups will be banned and all their bank accounts, all their linkages would be sealed. And the idea would be that all the countries in the world should enact consistent legislation, standard legislation to deal with the terror groups. Extraordinary special legislation. But what are the hurdles to CCIT? Let us discuss those also. See, CCIT has been particularly facing a lot of problem, right? US wants that the draft should exclude acts committed by military forces of state during peacetime as acts of terrorism. वरना स्टेट टेररिज्म भी डिफिनेशन हो जाएगा. और जो यूएस ने अफगानिस्तान में, इराक में, वियतनाम में और दुनिया के पता नहीं कितनी सारी जगहों में किया है, वो टेररिज्म से कम नहीं है. So the concern that US has is that they do not want CCIT to include acts of military agencies as acts of terrorism. And this is precisely the argument which is being made by Latin American countries, where Latin American countries are saying that we want that the draft should cover state terrorism because this America has been causing terrorist activities in our nation. And then see, Organization of Islamic countries want exclusion of national liberation movements, especially Israel, Palestine conflict, Kashmir conflict, etc., out of the ambit of terrorism. So, see, there is nothing like good or bad terrorism, as I was telling you. So, it's very difficult to evolve a consensus on it. This is what I have mentioned here. उसके अलावा मैंने यहाँ पे lone wolf terror attacks के बारे में लिखा हुआ है कि what do you mean by lone wolf terror attacks? See, as you people would know, lone wolf terrorism is a terrorism where terrorist attacks are caused by an individual who may or may not have allegiance to any particular group, जो कि किसी हो सकता है ऑर्गेनाइजेशन की इशारों पे काम कर रहा हो या नहीं कर रहा हो, but as an individual किया हो उसने. In America, a number of terror attacks where people used gunfire to kill a lot of people could be termed as lone wolf terror attacks, where people just acted with their individual motivation to cause terror in the minds of the people. So a lone wolf is a person who prepares and commits violent acts alone outside of any command structure and without any material assistance from any group. Causes of lone wolf attack मैंने mention किया हुआ है, alienation of community, mental psychological disorder, lax gun control laws जैसे यूएसए में है. मैंने आपको बताया भी था पहले, अगर आप यूएसए जाओ तो वहाँ पे वॉलमार्ट वगैरह के अंदर असॉल्ट राइफल्स टंगी होती हैं, मतलब देख के एकदम आदमी का सर घूम जाता है कि ये क्या चल क्या रहा है. Right? So, what are the challenges in overcoming lone wolf terrorism? It is very difficult to apprehend and to anticipate. Use of social media by the terror groups to create polarization, radicalization amongst the youth. Possibilities of a complex network that may exist, because of which it is very difficult to detect how the lone wolf terror and terrorists may be attached to some organization or the other or not. And then I have mentioned about way forward to deal with lone wolf terrorism also. You please read this on your own. Right? So this is all that was supposed to be discussed as a part of internal security classes. I hope that you enjoyed the classes and I hope that you learned something new. You got a new perspective. And most importantly, you will be able to retain this, revise this and use this in the examination. I have shared notes, handwritten notes of the previous batch in a segmented manner, fragmented manner. What I will do is just right after the class, I will share the PDF of comprehensive notes with the class coordinator and he will upload them on the platform. Okay, so Manish, right after the class, I will send you the PPT and you can use that PDF and you can upload that onto the Student platform. थोड़ी वो बड़ी फाइल थी इसलिए मैंने पहले नहीं भेजी थी, and that has all the notes, handwritten notes related to the internal security in the previous class, right? So this is all about the internal security classes. Now, any questions that you people may have related to whatever we have discussed, and we can call up the class now, right? I'll just call up the class with the quote for the day, and that will be it. Now, quote for the day. Sometime later becomes never, so do it now. Life is very short. Time that you have on your hands is also very short to prepare for this examination. Don't waste it. Use the maximum possible time that you can. Now the examination is just a few months away. Tell to yourself that you're going to give your best in next 5 months. Just next 5 months, and then after that 4 months more, and believe me, your life would change if you can just put your head down for next 9 months and tell yourself that I have to work hard. There are no excuses. Excuses are only made when you are bound to fail. So try to not make any excuse. And मैं बार बार यही बोलता हूँ कि अगर आप अपने आप को शीशे में देख सकते हो रोज रात को सोने से पहले और बोल सकते हो कॉन्फिडेंटली कि हाँ आज मैंने जितनी में मेहनत हो सकता था मैंने की, then you will be fine, right? Always to keep that in mind, right? Fine. Thank you so much for attending the classes so patiently. I really hope that these classes help you in acing the examination. But my only piece of advice to you would be that please keep reading the newspapers on a daily basis, and please keep referring the monthly current affairs magazine also on a time to time, so that you can keep updating your information and knowledge, because this examination is very dynamic, ever evolving. These notes can give you a basic structure, but ultimately how many marks you will get in the examination will be dependent upon how you are able to relate the elements from current affairs also into your answers. That will be very, very important in determining success or failure in this examination, right? Thank you so much, and I'm wishing all of you all the very best. And in case you people have any queries or any issues, you can always reach out to me on my email ID. I shared it with you earlier as well. I'll just share it with you again. The email ID is as following. These are 2 email IDs. You can write on any of them, and just be a bit patient because my response on the emails is usually a bit slow. jatin.g@visionis.in and Jatin Gupta CSE@gmail.com, right? Wishing all of you all the very best, and hopefully the situation around COVID would improve, and when I would be there in the classroom, you can always come and meet me after my classes. Wishing you all of you all the very best. Please work hard, give all that you have, and do it with a smile. Bye bye, take care.